The reason that I undertook to do all of this now, the reason that I put all my chips on Black 13 now, is that the world is in a perilous state, and I'm not prepared to say the world will end Thursday. I don't believe it's true anyway. I think that, again, I've been doing this for 33 years. I've heard a zillion and one predictions that the world will end Thursday, and it never does. Something always changes. The world is dynamic. The world is full of people, and each one of those people is dynamic. And so you set up a prediction based on, if this continues as it has in the past, this must happen, and that might be a completely plausible conclusion, except that whatever it is you're talking about will not continue as it has in the past. Things will change. The markets are dynamic. The political structure, political apparatus is dynamic. Individual people are dynamic. Companies are dynamic. Every sort of organization that you can name is dynamic. They're all doing different things in response to the world around them. Everything is. Every organism is. I mean, that's in the nature. I mean, the definition of life is responding to changes in your circumstances, responding, one may hope, appropriately, but responding in any case. And so the argument that the world will end Thursday doesn't sway me too much, and yet it is completely plausible to me that the road we're on has to lead to disaster. If we do not reverse our course eventually, soon enough, really, this has to lead to disaster. We cannot continue as we have. We cannot, the national debt or the deficit, the budget deficit in the United States now equals 100% of the gross national product of the United States. And what that means is that if everybody worked for a year and a day with no compensation, then we could pay down this year's deficit. And that's absurd. It's obvious that we can't continue that way. If you were living that way in your own finances, it would be obvious to you that it couldn't continue, and there's no way that it can continue at the national or international scale either. Sooner or later, something has to give. And obviously, ideally, the best thing would be for us to reverse our course, to go in a different direction and do things differently. That doesn't seem too likely right now, although it's something that I'm actively campaigning for. That's why all my money is on Black 13, because I want us to do things differently. I want for all of us to do things differently. But if that doesn't happen, and if there is a collapse, what might be the consequences? And I am naturally optimistic. It is not in my nature to be dour, to be despairing about anything. And one of the things that I'm particularly excited about, and I want to write more about this in the future because I think it's really, really interesting, is all of the wonderful things that are going on in the East, particularly in India and China, but also in Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan. There are lots and lots, Australia for that matter. The East, as we define it, not the Orient, because we're not talking about Orientis in Latin means East, but we don't define it that way. We always hear Asian when we hear the word Orient, but it's the East as defined by the globe and also in many cases the Southern Hemisphere. And in fact, the Southern Hemisphere, including Brazil and South Africa, and there are all kinds of interesting things happening south of the equator that we don't pay very much attention to in the United States because we're pretty self-centered and we don't really pay attention to anything. But I'm interested by all of the things that are going on in the Southern Hemisphere and in the eastern quadrant of the globe. And these are good reasons to be cheerful, even if the West manages to implode, and it's doing everything it can to implode. You can't fault the governments of the West for not doing everything they can to destroy Western civilization, because they are. They're really good at it, and they've practiced for 2,000 years, and by God, they're going to do it for good this time. Well, even if they do, it's not the end of the world. And I am interested in talking about what's going on in the East, and frankly, I'm interested in hearing from people who are exploring the ideas of, capitalism, individualism, egoism in these countries on the make, these countries where they have economic growth, where they're really excited about the possibilities of being alive as a human being. I'm interested in hearing about from people and about people who are in that circumstance because it's interesting to me, because it's wonderful, and frankly because it represents a path of salvation that the West will be able to avail itself of if it should happen to screw things up completely this time. But frankly, the last time this happened, after the fall of Rome, the same condition existed. The Byzantium Empire, the Roman Empire of the East is what it was called at that time. But this was a huge source of intellectual capital for the West when the West was, groveling in pig shit in the Dark Ages. And even with the ascent of Islam, Islam was no friend to the West. Islam is an anti-Hellenic counter-revolution. That's what it is. But even then, there was so much going on in the Empire of the East that kept the ideas of the West alive when the West was incompetent to do anything, couldn't successfully blow its own nose. And yet those ideas were kept alive, and thanks to the preservation of that knowledge in the East, we were able to dig out, and this is the Renaissance, the Age of Reason, the Enlightenment, etc. This is, thank God, the people in Byzantium were there, because if the Empire of the East had fallen at the same time as the Empire of the West, who knows how long it would have taken us to dig out. And these are not happy ideas to consider. I do understand that. It's not anything that anybody wants to think about or talk about, or certainly not something that anyone would ever hope for or wish for. This is one of my objections to the way that political matters are handled now, is that the people who are best equipped to understand what's going on are so busy lamenting everybody else's sins that they're incapable of practicing anything like virtue. And virtue in this circumstance means marshaling your mental resources, marshaling your intellectual capital, and applying them to the problem that we confront. And nobody is willing to do that. That's what I'm doing. That's why my money is on Black 13. This is what it is that I am doing, is persuading you, talking to you in particular, and persuading you to master the ideas that I'm talking about, to become an egoist in my sense, to become an advocate of self-adoration, of creating a self within your mind that is worthy of your own worship. Which means a whole lot different than what people say when they use the word selfish. Typically what people mean when they use the word selfish is spiteful. And if there's anything spiteful in your behavior, you need to correct that, because that is not to your benefit. That is not to your advantage. You do not love yourself more after behaving spitefully. In fact, you love yourself quite a bit less forever. Because again, you have created an instance of regret in your mind. You've done something that you knew in advance was morally wrong by your own moral standards. And now you have to live with that forever. This is not selfish. This is not self-adoration in the way that I understand it. It's the contrary. It's self-destruction. And I'm opposed to self-destruction in every form. And in particular, I'm opposed to the kind of self-destruction that passes for political rhetoric right now, or philosophical rhetoric, because it's completely useless. It's nothing but a catalog of sins, and an infinite catalog of sins will not create a single virtue. And we don't need to forswear sin. Obviously, we need to forswear sin in order to get better, but that will not consist of getting better. The way that we get better is by doing better, learning better, and doing better. And that's the objective that I seek. And I am highlighting the benefits that we can realize by capitalizing on the things that are going on in the East writ large, because if the West manages to completely screw the pooch, the East will still be there to help us dig our way out. And so I'm interested in talking about that stuff, and I'm interested in hearing from anybody who is working on philosophical problems in the Southern Hemisphere, in the East, you name it, in the places in the world where people are not in despair, where to the contrary, they're excited about the future. I want to hear from you.